Thank you. Thank you. Good. Councillor Dick stepped into the breach, and I'd just like to take this opportunity of thanking him for chairing the meeting in my absence at such short notice. Members of the committee present this evening are Councillors Owen Jeffrey, Jane Langford, Alan Macro, Richard Sumner, Louise Sturgis, Clive Taylor and Martha Vickers, and one of our cooperative members, Emily Daly. Council officers present to advise and support the meeting are Neil Goddard via Zoom. Do we know whether Mr. Goddard's here? Yes. Yeah, thank you. Sue O'Brien. Neil Goddard is Service Director for Education and Send. Sue O'Brien, Complaints and Access to Records Manager. Nikki Robertson, Quality Assurance and Safeguarding Manager. Dave Raitt, Service Manager. Hannah Geddett, Send Strategy Officer. Gordon Oliver is our clerk for the meeting, and Stephen Charge is our Ben Wright is our Zoom host. And tonight the meeting is being live streamed on YouTube, so members of the public may follow proceedings. This evening, if we hear the fire alarm, we must leave the building immediately via the emergency exits. The assembly point is the Dolphin car park. If the lockdown alarm sounds, we will await instructions from officers. We will adjourn the meeting until such time as it is safe to proceed. Do members have any questions about the way in which this meeting will be conducted before we proceed? Thank you. Mr. Oliver, do we have any apologies?
Yes, Chairman. Councillors Paul Dick and Janine Lewis have given their apologies, and Councillor Richard Sumner is present as a substitute for Councillor Paul Dick. Councillor Heather Codling, Anne-Marie Dodds have also sent their apologies.
Excuse me. I think I'm subbing for somebody.
Apologies, and Councillor Billy Drum. Councillor Billy Drum is present as Councillor Janine Lewis is as her substitute.
Can members let me know if you're happy to accept the minutes of the meeting of on the 5th of June 2025 as a true and accurate record of the meeting? I'd like to have a proposal for that. Thank you.
So propose.
Thank you. And a seconder? And Councillor Drummond. And all those in favour of accepting the minutes, please raise their hands. Anybody against? Anybody abstaining? Thank you. We move on to item 3. There are no previous recommendations to executive. This item is recommendations and actions tracker. Does anybody have any comments or queries in relation to any of the allocated actions? Do we have allocated actions?
Yes, Chair. The actions are all allocated to individual officers, and a lot of them are in progress and relate to items that have yet to be programmed or yet to come to the board.
And there's a note here that a number of the actions relate to future reports that are yet to be programmed. And when we come to discussing the work programme later in the meeting, we can discuss those items that need to be programmed. Do any members have any declarations relating to items on the agenda?
No.
And have we received any petitions, Mr. Oliver?
No, Chairman, no petitions received.
So we're on to item 6, which is the Youth Justice Annual Plan, and I will invite Mr. Raitt to present the report.
Thank you, Chairman. The Youth Justice Plan is an annual plan which is mandated by the government through the Crime and Disorder Act 1998. It requires the local authority partnership, which delivers youth justice services, to present a plan which essentially tries to outline what our objectives are and our approach is to addressing crime amongst children and young people. The plan that's presented before you tonight to scrutinise has been examined and explored by the Building Communities Together Partnership and the Youth Justice Management Group. It is making its way to full council. This plan has to be submitted to the Youth Justice Board and is held in the House of Commons Library for reference. What the plan serves to do is to try and outline our approach to working with children and young people in West Berkshire to prevent them committing crime, to try and reduce the likelihood of them committing further crime in the future. It has a look back at the achievements in the previous year. It gives you some details statistically about some of the children and young people who have committed crime and the profile of those children. It outlines some of the achievements of the team and the partnership in the previous year, and then sets out the variety of plans and objectives that we've got in the coming year that we hope will continue to reduce offending and reoffending amongst children, that will keep communities safe, reduce the likelihood of further victims of crime in the area. So essentially, this is an opportunity for you to scrutinise, to ask any questions as you see fit.
Thank you very much. Do members have any questions that they'd like to put to Mr. Ray? Arthur, Councillor Vickers.
Hi, thank you very much. First of all, thank you very much for the report. It's really, I learnt a lot from looking through it. It's an excellent report. And I noted that your team, David, has been judged as outstanding, and that must be something we must all be very proud of. And I imagine Dominic was probably going to say something to compliment you on that. So I got in there first. So yeah, I mean, that's really excellent news. And I can see reading through the report why that may be, all the work you're trying to do to prevent problems from occurring, and particularly how you're trying to involve the young people in comments about what they think about the work that you're doing with them. And that's really must be so important that you actually give them a chance to talk to you. Obviously, you outline things that you're concerned about. I've got a little question first. What does GRT stand for?
GRT is an acronym for Gypsy Romany Traveller.
Oh, right.
Children.
Thank you. I mean, that's always a comment that whenever we get reports, I know it must be boring, but there's so many little acronyms and we don't remember them. I mean, you know them because you're using them all the time, but we don't remember them. So that didn't immediately occur to me, but I can see why that's important. Obviously, there's things that we all know about, poverty, etc. I mean, one of the things that is concerning about West Berkshire, obviously, is, and you mentioned this, is the level of suspension and exclusion from schools. That in West Berkshire, there's a significant high risk factor. And obviously, we probably want to know a little bit more about that. Why is that the case? You also mentioned that the increase in violence by girls, I don't know whether that's girls on girls or girls on boys or whatever, but that's gone up from, I think, 14% to 31%. And that seems to be a big jump. And whether you've got thoughts about why that's happening and whether we need to do more. I mean, I notice among your staff, and you're all here, you're all women, apart from Dave himself. So that must be useful when it comes to working with girls, I imagine. So I don't know whether you've got any thoughts about that. And also, the youngest person you've got offending is 10. And sorry about that. And you say you work from 10 to 17-year-olds. So you're obviously going into primary schools, working with primary school children. Would it be unsuitable to work with children younger than 10, as you've actually got an offender at 10? You know, do you need to be going back a bit? I mean, I don't know how far back do you go, really? But I mean, children, I've got a 10-year-old grandson, and, you know, he's pretty bright, and he was pretty bright at 9 and whatever. So I don't know how early you feel you can work with people. And I probably should shut up now, actually. But yeah, I mean, the feedback comments, I mean, mentioning the education, one of the comments from the parents and the volunteers, no, from the children and the volunteers, is the importance of education. So that obviously shows how important keeping children in school is. Anyway, I'll stop there.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Vickers, for the compliment about the inspection. We appreciate that. And yeah, welcome that. You mentioned a whole variety of things, and I'll try and tease that. No, it's fine, and they're useful comments. We work with children from the age of 10 to 17 because 10 is the age of criminal responsibility. So if a child under the age of 10, let's imagine, committed a crime, they essentially would be referred into children's social care as a safeguarding issue. So it's not that they wouldn't be supported, but they would be supported out with the criminal justice system. And we do have the lowest age of criminal responsibility in Europe. So we are low in comparison to many other countries. So it is unusual for us to work with really little children, with I say little 10-year-olds. You can see the peak age for offending is older, but we do have every once in a while some children who are 10, and we try to not give them a criminal identity. We've tried to work with them in a constructive, positive way, which builds a different sort of identity away from crime or criminal identity. You mentioned suspensions and exclusions. They are high, and we know research tells us that suspension and exclusion are linked, risk factors linked to offending. So one of the projects we've got, which is mentioned in the report, is PIP, which stands for Positive Intervention Programme. So we invite schools who have identified children who they consider at risk of committing crime in the community, or whose behaviour, if it happened in the community, would be offending, to refer into us. And we are very keen to engage children to try and divert them, to prevent them from actually committing crime. And we're looking to try and do that to reduce suspensions. Hot off the press, we're working with the Office of the Police and Crime Commissioner to target children who have been suspended from school, to try and reduce further suspensions earlier on. So they don't need to have committed behaviours that might be a crime, but actually we can do that. So we're hoping to start that in October as a pilot through to the end of the year, a programme called Focused Diversion. You mentioned another question, which
violence, girls violence.
Girls and violence, yes. So you're right, there is a jump. It's not unique to West Berkshire. So colleagues across Thames Valley have also explored the data, and I've got some materials just come to me today looking at that. The type of violence often is violent crime, girls against girls, and a lot of the crime that we see committed by girls is often got its genesis online. So there's online activity which leads to violence. That's also the case for boys as well, but that's one of the things that we are seeing. So we're just very cognizant of that. You're absolutely right. The majority of our staff are female. That it does help us in terms of working with girls, but we're mindful we actually still work with the majority of boys.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Jeffrey.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, I echo very much the things that Councillor Vickers have said. One or two things that I would add onto that list. At 5.5, you've got the reference to elevating victim engagement, and I'm wondering whether you might be able to tell us a little bit more as to exactly what that does mean. I also very much picked up on page 32 that more female children are in the youth justice system locally than nationally, and have we got any kind of explanation for that? On page 43, there's a reference there to the massive jumps and that the kinds of outcomes you're getting, pages 43 and 44. So again, a comment on that, and the use of drugs is up within this age range as well. And I think, there was one other, and that was, and this is just, I put an exclamation mark to myself, but it's definitely with a tick, and that is on page 56, where there's the talk about the food hampers going into households to ensure they have got adequate nutrition and they've got enough there actually for the children to be eating. So any comments on those would be appreciated.
Thank you for your attention. So I'm going to try and do in reverse order. The food hampers, one of the things that we were really mindful of is that we were having children come to do sessions with us hungry and really struggling to concentrate. So it was actually really important to make food available to them that they could eat and they could then take home. So they if they need to take food home with them, and that's just it's a sad indictment that some children really struggle with having appropriate food. So we will also make referrals into the food bank and to support their parents in terms of welfare. So. Absolutely with that. The profile of the children, I think, which you've highlighted and some of the differences we see. We have the cohort of children we work with fluctuates year on year. So sometimes you'll see what looks like really significant changes. It might not be quite as significant in terms of the actual numbers. We are really mindful that, for instance, in terms of substance misuse, we're really fortunate that the Edge, VIA, who are the substance misuse providers, are co-located with us in the Youth Justice Support Team. So children who come and access a service at the Youth Justice Support Team can also see colleagues in the Edge. So there's a real good synergy there. And we've got a programme with the police around drug diversion, so we're able to seamlessly connect children who have a substance misuse problem into the Edge that way. Would you just remind me of what else you said and I've overlooked?
One of my particular points was it does seem to be there are more female children now in the system, and that was my understanding from reading it was that's a national situation as well as with us. And I did actually mean to say it even when I started my comments. I'm not a great mathematician, but my father tried to drum some things into me. And one is I'm absolutely aware that we're dealing with some fairly low numbers. So 3 or 4 extra people does look like a fairly big percentage, or is a fairly big percentage, but it's not the same thing as going from 1,000 to 2,000.
Thank you. So in terms of the girls, yes, there is nationally there is an increase, but in West Berkshire there is a more significant increase in girls, and we've seen that pattern over the last few years. That pattern is somewhat replicated in Thames Valley, so there might be an approach that's being taken by Thames Valley Police, but it's hard to really bottom out because, as I say, West Berkshire is still slightly higher than others. We don't know why there are more girls in the system. We work with children who have been referred to us. So you have to have been essentially arrested or processed by the police to come to us. So there's something happening either in the community or on the policing approach that's drawing girls in. And I'd love to be able to tell you the why, but we don't know.
I have Councillor Macro next.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, I was going to make the issue, to mention the issue regarding initializations and so on. But there's a couple of pieces of kind of jargon as well, which I'd wonder if you could tell us about. One is gravity level, and the other one, there's quite a few references to substantive outcomes. I wonder if you could eliminate those, please.
Yes.
I will. Thank you for that. So each criminal offence has what's called a gravity score. Essentially, it relates to the seriousness of the offence. So the police have what they describe as a youth gravity matrix. And so for every crime that is on the statute book, they will have a corresponding gravity number. And depending on the number that's associated with that crime will give you certain disposals, certain outcomes that you could get. So some of those outcomes are substantive. and informal. So substantive outcomes are outcomes essentially which are recorded on the police national computer, that if you were having a DBS check, they would be recorded. Or if you had to go for a job and say, do you have any convictions? Substantive ones would have to be declared in certain cases. The converse is informal outcomes, which are not recorded on the police national computer, which wouldn't come up in a DBS check, which wouldn't be declared as a conviction. They are, if you grew up a while ago, you might get a clip round the ear from a police officer, or a strong telling off. Those would be described, in terms of paper forms, that would be now an informal outcome.
Thank you. And presumably gravity, that the larger the number, the more serious the offence.
Absolutely. So there are certain crimes which would attract a custodial sentence because of they are that high, and then the lower ones would attract often an informal outcome.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So I thought the report was excellent as well. So thank you very much to the whole team for it. And again, very interesting reading for me as well. In the Voice of the Child, the feedback section, both the children and the volunteers said that helping children stay in education and do well was one of their top 3 priorities. So I wanted to ask, are you satisfied that the priorities for 2025 and 26 for education, training and employment are enough, or is there more you'd like to be doing? Obviously I appreciate you're working with a number of constraints as well. Thank you.
Thank you. You're absolutely right. The feedback was really clear from those groups. We are a partnership, so we work really closely with colleagues in education. We work closely with colleagues in schools, in colleges, in other providers. So it's not that we as the Youth Justice Support Team will meet the need of all those children. What we will try and do is advocate for those children. We will work really closely to try and help them sustain education. That can look like different things. So some of our children have speech language communication difficulties who really struggle in education. We have a speech and language therapist who's able to work with teachers and other colleagues to assist in terms of helping them understand and make the process of education work better for them. Your question was, could we do? I would always like more. I would always strongly advocate for our children, because our children come with real complexity. You'll see that with the profile. So they're not the easiest children to accommodate. They're the children who will struggle and will often challenge education providers. And yet they're the children that if we can make the most difference. The cost to the public purse, if we get it wrong, if they slip out of education and end up in a custodial setting in the future, is huge. So there is not only a sort of a moral imperative to do something, but it's also it just makes sense that we keep our children wherever possible in education. So yes, we can always do more, and it's a partnership approach. Thank you.
Councillor Taylor.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I thought it was an excellent report, and very informative. I learned a lot from reading through it. I've got a question relating to school exclusions and suspensions. And it's not something I've specifically picked up in the report, but it's something that happened, I was informed of recently that I found a little disturbing. I'm a governor of a primary school that has a very low level of exclusions and suspensions at the primary, very, very low, I'm told. Certainly I've seen stats. Yet the secondary school that most of the children go to, the rate of the children coming from this particular school who are then excluded from the secondary school is particularly high. Now, I know that is actually being looked into, but I did wonder, is this a picture that emerges with other schools? Maybe it's just exceptional with the schools that I'm operating with. But it did, I mean, it's been suggested to me that possibly the primary school was sort of, taking excessive measures to ensure that no one was excluded. And when they're then released into the secondary school, it's a totally different environment, atmosphere, and they find themselves more prone to them being excluded.
Thank you for the question, Councillor Taylor. I'm really conscious that I have a number of specialist education colleagues who are probably far better equipped to talk about this than me, but I'll give you my observation, is that for children who may struggle in education, primary school, you have an individual teacher who knows them and is able to support them and works with them consistently day in, day out. Those children who then go into secondary school may well have 5 or 6 teachers per day and may well have over the course of a week 10 teachers who all have a slightly different approach. And if you are, for instance, neurodiverse, if you are a child who may struggle with routine and boundaries, that transition from primary to secondary can be really challenging. And so we do see children who have done relatively well in primary school struggle with the transition to secondary school. And I know that colleagues in education and in schools have done a lot of work recently around that transition piece to try and work really hard to enable children who've done well in primary to continue to thrive in secondary. I think your other observation, if you look at our secondary schools, you will find some secondary schools with really low levels of suspension and others with a similar size cohort with higher levels of suspension. And I think there is probably learning that we can do between our secondary schools about approaches that they can take to reduce suspension. Because suspension, we know, suspension and exclusion is a factor that leads to offending. And whatever we can do to reduce that would be welcome.
Thank you. Councillor Somner.
Thank you, Chair. And again, add my praise to the report before us. Just a couple of things from me. I think most of the things that had come to mind have already been dealt with, so I won't repeat those. You mentioned working in the wider piece with regards to the PCC about other areas across the Thames Valley. Is there any cross-border impact that comes through in these figures at all? Is it purely children that are in West Berkshire that have always been in West Berkshire?
Thank you for the question. We have children who are placed into our area from other local authorities. They could be children in care. We have children who are placed into our area because their home local authority have recognised there's a risk in where they're staying and they get placed in our area. And the data that you see here in this captures both. So when they come into our area, we will offer a service and we will try and reduce the likelihood of them committing crime as well. But we are also responsible for children from West Berkshire who are placed out of area. So we have a dual responsibility as a home youth justice service and a host youth justice service.
Thank you. So on that basis, then there is a need for a lot of cross-border working with other authorities around and about. Presumably, usually it's just across the border rather than going too far.
You would hope it's just across the border, but we do get some children who are placed at significant distance, and that it can be more problematic. But yes, we work closely with our colleagues around the country where children are placed.
Okay, thank you. Final point from me, Chairman, and it's just a point that you made right at the start of your presentation with regards to where the paper is going, and it's just for completeness. I think you said full council and the paper says executive. So just for clarity on that, just to make sure the paper's right before it moves on. It doesn't need to be answered now, but just to be clear.
That will be my omission. So point taken, we'll make sure it's amended.
Thank you.
Oh.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Yeah, and thanks for an excellent report. I mean, for the point of anybody online listening, can you tell members here this evening how many cases there are a year? And could you give us a breakdown between those who do accept restorative justice and those who don't?
Thank you, Councillor Drummond. So the headline figure in terms of the number of children who committed a crime, I'm just flicking through till I get to the right page, was we had 147 children committing 243 crimes. We work with more children than that, in that the PIP program I talked about, which was in schools, is not factored in. So there are other children that we work with who aren't considered in this. In terms of restorative justice, so restorative justice is a particular form where we would be trying to engage the child with the victim of their offence. Now, not every offence has a victim. So if, for instance, a possession of cannabis, there's no specific victim. The levels of direct restorative justice is low. Often we find that victims don't want to meet with the person who's committed crime against them. And so that can often be a struggle. But we do lots of indirect restorative justice, where we are doing mediation between the child and the person that they've offended against. That could be in the form of letter or other communications. But I'm not sure that it's contained within here about how much restorative justice. It can vary. So it's much better if we are really timely. So if we are able to, it's a bit like when a child, if you've got a child and they do something wrong, actually having punishment or consequences after that as soon as possible is excellent. It would be very strange to say to your child, I'm going to punish you, but it'll take 4 months. And one of the challenges sometimes we have with working with children is that the timeliness of the investigation can be really long. The time it takes to process through a court can be long. And actually a child goes, oh my goodness, you're talking to me about something that happened 9 months ago or a year ago. And actually for them, often life has moved on, and it's really important. So we're doing lots of work with the police to do that. That doesn't quite answer your question, because we work hard to try and be as timely as possible, but sometimes there are constraints about that which are outside our control.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Vickers.
Just a small point, sort of, probably just a little bit outside your remit, but you said you work with building communities together, is that right? So, not quite restorative justice, but way back, I remember there being issues with one of our small local sheltered housing, and to do with young people and some antisocial behaviour. And we had an officer, this is a long time ago, an officer at the time, and it's sort of the precursor of building communities together. I can't remember what her department was called. And we organised a sort of meeting of and I can't really remember all the details of the young people and some of the older people. And I just think I don't hear a lot about that sort of thing going on, because there's so many complaints really about young people's behaviour, and often things are blamed on them that aren't them, and it's often older people who come along later and trash things, and so it's sort of just getting a conversation going between young people and older people, so that they actually understand each other, where each other is coming from. And is there anything like that going on?
So my colleague Stacey here, who is the brains behind the operation, she manages everything at the Youth Justice Service, has worked really closely with the police and Building Communities Together partnership to essentially address antisocial behaviour. So the sort of things that you've just described, where often it's not actually a crime that's been committed, but the behaviour is causing distress to the community. The behaviour is causing anxiety to residents. Again, the police, they will write a letter to the parents to say, we've noticed this behaviour. They will send a copy to us, and we will go and start working with those children. So essentially trying to address antisocial behaviour as early on as possible. And if that requires a meeting between people, we will facilitate that. If that requires a community engagement, we'll do that. So it hasn't died a death. And actually, it's one of the areas that the Police and Crime Commissioner has recognised as really good practice and wants to highlight in the future across Thames Valley.
Thank you, members. Over to me now, Mr. Ray. And I'm going to echo, first of all, Councillor Vickers' congratulations on yet again receiving an outstanding judgment. I know that you're a repeat offender on this, aren't you? Your team's record is absolutely superb. So well done to you all. Thank you so much. Yeah, so I'm just going to go back to the exclusions point because I think it's really important. I know you've had a couple of questions, but I was thinking about what particular actions you take to reduce exclusions, because we know about the strong link between exclusions and offending, and you've spoken a bit about it. And I was going to ask you whether you need to do anything to strengthen the approach, and you told us, didn't you, about the pilot with TVP? So, I mean, is that enough, or do you think there's more work to be done to strengthen the approach, reduce exclusions?
Thank you, Councillor Bowick, for your warm words. I think there's both a strategic approach and there's an operational approach. So at a strategic level, suspension and exclusion has been recognised as an issue across Thames Valley. So the Office of the Police and Crime Commissioner, in their sort of convening power, has drawn together local authorities from across Thames Valley to share best practice, to relaunch what's called the Safer Schools policy, to enhance the role of the Safer Schools police officer in schools. West Berkshire hasn't had a schools officer for a number of years. That's been reinstated. So there are some areas which are at a strategic level, which I think are coming into play, which I think will be of benefit locally. I think operationally, we want to be as quick as possible to respond to any changes, trends in that. And I think we'd want to be continuing to advocate for the therapeutic thinking approach in schools, because we know that so many of our children have real complexities and challenges, and they're struggling in school. So what if we're able to strengthen the approach of our colleagues in schools to support those children, to retain them in school, and yeah, as I say, there are other colleagues sat close by, I'm sure, who are working very hard and have some very detailed approaches to reducing suspension and exclusion. And from the youth justice perspective, we are keen to complement that and work in partnership around that.
Thank you. And you mentioned about how the plan has been built in consultation with the management board and with building communities together. With building communities together, how do you actually work with them? Is it through the management board, or is there a separate stream of dialogue there?
So the Building Communities Together team has the community safety manager, but also the serious violence coordinator, the prevent coordinator, domestic abuse. So there are a number of individuals within that team who have very close working relationships with the youth justice support team. We collaborate on a variety of different projects and approaches. And so that interface is very helpful. We're also part of the Building Communities Together board, and therefore are able to have discussions there where we're able to raise and escalate matters of concern, which are community-based concerns, and essentially take a partnership type approach. We've also used that group as a sounding board to get feedback from them about the sort of things that should help shape our partnership approach to addressing youth justice. So it's a sort of a multi-layered approach.
Very interesting, thank you. The plan is very interesting. It's an excellent report, thank you. In it, you talk about the evidence showing that prevention letters and the PIT program really works. Can you tell us a bit about how successful that is? And there's some numbers in the paper that I think you could just amplify a little bit for us.
Thank you. This plan actually has been forwarded to the Youth Justice Board already, and in October we have a visit from the Chief Operating Officer of the Youth Justice Board specifically to look at the points that you've just drawn out, because they're also interested in this area as best practice across the piece. So in terms of prevention letters and our approach to addressing antisocial behaviour, I think when I responded to Councillor Vickers, essentially, it's trying to address and support children to change their behaviour before they get arrested. One of the frustrations we had heard from the police a number of years ago was they're saying, we have to wait until a child has committed a crime, then we can arrest them, and then you'll get involved. And actually, this changes the narrative and the dynamic on that. You don't need to have committed a crime. We can get involved. If you can identify a behaviour which is problematic, which is antisocial, we are absolutely willing to get involved, because we know that our intervention makes a difference. And we can see both anecdotally and through our data that children who engage in that preventative activity, that preventative work, are less likely to come to our attention in the future. And again, for those of you who've been around for a number of years, you'll see the success of youth justice, because so much of what we do now is front-loaded. It's about prevention rather than the substantive work of we have very few children who actually go to court, because so much of what we do is now preventative and up that front. You also mentioned PIP, which is the Positive Intervention Programme in schools. And what we've essentially done there is said to schools, you know your children best. You know the children who you're most concerned about. And teachers are brilliant at identifying the sort of children that they are concerned about. So we don't have a particular criteria. We say to the schools, if you are concerned about a child who you think would benefit from some work with the youth justice team because you're concerned that they might commit crime, then we will work with them. And again, we've got some data that would support the work that does.
Excellent, thank you. We know that that certain groups are overrepresented in your part of the world, and Councillor Vickers mentioned the GRT community as an example. How are the different groups supported differently? What actually happens in providing that support? I'm thinking about the difference.
Yep. So our team are trained in terms of working around diversity and disproportionality. We have a variety of screening tools and work that we can do, which both identifies particular needs, but also enables our staff to then respond. Each of the plans of work that we do with children identifies the way that they learn. So they might be a kinesthetic or a visual or an auditory learner, and we will adapt our work to the way that they learn. We'll also take account of the approaches that they respond best to. Some children have a concentration span which is quite short, and therefore we'll do much shorter sessions, that sort of stuff. We would do some children appreciate being seen at home. Other children appreciate being seen in the community. We have members of staff who go out into, for instance, the traveller sites to kind of do proactive work in that community. We have approaches that our health staff advise us on when it comes to working in a bespoke manner with different children, just trying to respond to the individual needs of children. So what we try not to do is do a one-size-fits-all. We try and be really bespoke and really tailored to the individual needs of children. So it's just that you are a girl doesn't mean that you are a girl who doesn't have also unique needs. Therefore, we will work, whether you're a boy or a girl, whether you have special education needs or not, we will work with you as an individual.
Thank you. And last one for me is around, you mentioned the restorative practices, and you spoke about the mediation and the long periods of time that over which those practices might come about. I'm just, how do you maintain, or how do you continue to listen to victims' voices in that extended period? Because their voice is important, of course, absolutely vital, but they must sometimes lose the will to live in terms of trying to be heard.
You're right. We have some long and ongoing conversations with colleagues in a charity called SAFE. SAFE provides support to children victims of crime, and one of their campaigns at the moment is about that piece, that timeliness piece, because it is really difficult. If you're a victim of crime and the response to justice just seems to drag on and on, it's really disheartening and really debilitating. So there's some work with the Office of the Police and Crime Commissioner and the Chief Constable around reducing timeliness, because that's one of the key factors which supports victims, is that you reduce that time so you get to a resolution. Our victim worker is very diligent, very good at keeping in contact with victims. But you're right. If we can reduce the time, that will make a difference, a substantive difference to victims.
Thank you so much. Oh.
You're quite right. I apologise. Sorry, it's just I was worried about my back. Do children slip through the net? And if so, do they then reappear later? And does the slipping through the net cause worse problems because perhaps they think there are no consequences? Do children who are identified as with potential issues feel that this is a kudos for them to boast about and live up to? And money allocation, you said earlier, which I was very interested in, that, if we can do all this preventative work, it will save a lot of money further on in the justice system and the prison system, presumably. What would you, if you could wave a magic wand, how would you allocate the proportion of money in the justice system? I hope I've made that clear.
Very, very clear.
Thank you.
So you asked about children slipping through the net. It is often the case, and certainly research would tell you, that children may well have committed crimes before they get caught. So by the time they get caught, for an offence, they may have done that a few times already. I think that in West Berkshire we have a really strong policing response. We have very active response from our colleagues, and I am assured that by the time that children are being identified, now there will be still lots of children who commit crime who haven't been caught, but I think that number is lower than it was historically. I think we benefit locally from a really quite responsive police force here, which is really helpful. But I don't doubt that there are children who slip through the net. In terms of kudos, we work really hard to avoid stigmatization. So one of the things that we know is that if a child develops a criminal identity, they see themselves as a criminal, often they will do exactly you've described, that kudos. And therefore, what we will try and do is avoid that stigmatization, that feeding into a sense of kudos. We want to do that differently. So often we won't take children to the building that we are based in. Often we'll work with them differently. We will do that in a way that emphasizes pro-social values. And lastly, you mentioned about finances. In terms of criminal justice outcomes, the most expensive outcome is a custodial sentence. And what we know is if you've got a custodial sentence, you're likely to keep on going into custody. What we have done in the last 10 years or so is reduce the numbers of children going into custody. You'll see in the report, it's 1 or 0 for the vast majority of years here. If you went back 15, 20 years, we had 18 children in custody 1 year. Those 18 children, I'm pretty sure the majority will still be going in and out of custody now. So what we know is that because we've now had a decade of having 1 or 2 children going into custody, that has reduced the number of children, or now young adults or adults, going into custody. Now, there will be some who will still go into custody in 18 and above, but you've saved millions because we've reduced that. So I would strongly advocate, wherever in the justice system is, preventative work, building pro-social identity, keeping children and young people in education, building the values of a responsible adult makes a huge difference.
May I ask a subsequent? Yes. So do you believe that the government, if you like, or the government allocate money in a sensible way to ensure that that preventative matter persists?
I think the report from David Gauke looking at reforms in the justice system would be welcome. I think the challenge the government have is that there are a significant number of people in the prison estate, and that costs money. And so you have to reduce that number to be able to reallocate money. So principles, I think it's really important to invest heavily in prevention, but to release that funding, something else needs to shift in the system, and that's the challenge. Thank you.
Thank you. Members have any other questions?
I know you're probably fed up with hearing from me, but Dave mentioned the importance of the relationship with the police. And in your report, you say you're very concerned about changes in the reorganisation of Thames Valley Police. And we've experiencing this in the health service. Everything's just getting bigger and broader. Have you thought about how you're going to address that? Because it sounds as though it's really important, your work with the police, in sort of going forward.
Thank you. At the time that this report was written, the harm reduction unit and the local command unit was just being established, and there were a variety of changes. Though that bedding in period is still going on, but we are more assured about the response. We're having, myself and my colleague Stacey and others are having a number of conversations with the police and being heard well.
Thank you. This report is going to. Have you decided it's going to executive?
It's been to executive. It's going to full council, I believe.
Full council. So no recommendations for us. I didn't note any actions for officers. Mr. Oliver, did you pick anything up? Then we just move on, don't we? Thank you. The next item is item 7, Children's Services and Education Complaints and Compliments Annual Report. And Ms. O'Brien is going to present this to us.
Good evening. I'm bringing to you the annual report for Children's Services for 2024 and 25. It's a reflection of all the complaints and compliments that we received. It's a little bit different this year. It's the first year of combining children's services with education. Also, we're responsible this year from November 2024 for monitoring and managing stage 2 complaints in the LGSEO. So we've got a better handle of what we're doing on it. So it's included in the reporting. There's been a small drop overall in cases recorded last year from previous years. And our emphasis is on learning from our complaints. Better reporting. We've got quarterly reporting with analysis and sharing our findings with the leadership team. Training provided so that we can learn from our mistakes and obviously prevent making them. And obviously listening to our children and our families. So you've had the report. Do you have any questions for me?
Thank you. So members, Councillor Sturgis.
Not a question, just a comment. I saw in the report 5.33, I thought it was extremely positive to see that complaints from children and young people are always prioritised.
Thank you. Councillor Vickers.
Well, I was going to say congratulations on all the compliments you got, actually, because I think it was really interesting looking through the compliments, and they were quite detailed, and you know, showing how you've listened to us. I mean, that must be really, you know, it must do you a lot of good when you get that feedback. I mean, the only thing I think you highlight sort of timeframes and managing expectations, and that must always be difficult. That people are expecting something to happen, and assessments take forever, and you know whether or not that's staff. And sometimes time goes by quite quickly for you because you're dealing with so many things. But for that particular client, it's what's going on for me. So I suppose, but you've mentioned that, so obviously I assume you're trying to regularly tell people, well, you know, there's a delay, but this is why. So, but you do highlight that. Thank you.
I can't remember, it's the start of it. Well, down for a really good report. It's just a small point. As of March 2025, 208 children were subject to child protection plans in West Berkshire, which is above the national average. Could you tell us why that's happening in Leafy West Berkshire?
Can't know, but my colleagues might.
Thank you.
Yes, Mrs. Ross.
I was going to say my report's obviously on the agenda tonight, and so that was something that I was going to comment upon. I think it's very similar to what you heard from Dave Ray. Unfortunately, sometimes there just are no easy answers as to why those numbers are higher. It's been on an upward trajectory, unsurprisingly, perhaps since COVID. So we're seeing a lot more complexity within the families, a lot more difficulties around financial hardship, perhaps drug and alcohol abuse, and that then unfortunately then brings along the child protection concerns that will accompany things like that quite often, such as child neglect, sadly physical harm. So yeah, there's no easy answer to it. Yes, we have been higher, but I'm actually just doing an analysis of it at the moment and the current picture. And what I'm hearing from colleagues across the Berkshire authorities and other South East sector local authorities that I'm in contact with is that this is something that is happening across the board. So when we say that we're higher than the national average, a lot of those statistics are older statistics than the ones that we're looking at and reporting on. And it may be that those statistics may grow and increase given what I'm hearing across the piece in line with ours, because that's certainly what other people are reporting.
Okay, thank you. And will somebody tell me, is there any school officers going after the children that are not going to school?
School attendance is
officers.
Yes, yeah. School attendance in general, just to say in terms of child protection conferences, is quite a highly scrutinised side of the work that we do, because we recognise, as Dave mentioned earlier, the risks for children if they're not in school can increase quite considerably. And the child protection conferences are multi-agency, so anybody who is involved and working or needs to be involved and working with a child or young person is invited to come into the conferences and become part of the plan around that particular.
I mean, I think I always mean in school. Is there anybody in schools, in secondary schools? Because St Bart's has just employed somebody to do that job. And is it something other schools are doing?
They have
to get them in.
Yeah, they have pastoral support workers, and there are designated safeguarding leads. Each school has a designated safeguarding lead, and they do come to the conferences. We get really good attendance from head teachers, the actual tutors themselves that are working with children and young people. So a wide variety of educational professionals. We get very good partnership working from the schools within the conference.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Sumner.
Thank you, Chairman. Again, yeah, another exceptionally informative report, and thank you for it. I think we're going to be saying that all night, to be honest. A question for me item 5.48 with regards to outcomes. There's a comment, both stages there are outcomes of information. And I just wondered whether that was highlighting a need for better information, but then as I was writing that down, I questioned myself whether that meant that the information was general information or whether all the information that might be part of that outcome was actually pertinent to the specific case that was being evaluated. So I suppose that's a two-stage question, really. Is it generic information, and does that therefore mean that we can look to provide better information up front so that the issue goes away earlier, I suppose?
There's possibly two answers to this question. When we first started evaluating some of the complaint responses, we weren't necessarily looking at whether we had there was fault, or whether we had, whether there was, we weren't actually looking to see whether we were upholding their complaint or whether we weren't. There was an element that we were just responding. So the LGSEO is quite clear about how they want their complaint responses. They want us to acknowledge fault, and they want us to do something about it. And that's all around learning. It's about understanding that, okay, we could have done it better. This is the way that we need to do it going forward. So to a certain degree, I think there was an element that we were just providing information and we were just giving them information based on their complaint, but we weren't actually making that decision as to whether there was a fault or whether there was no fault with it. So some of the older cases that I was evaluating are sort of like a little bit of flux. So should we have upheld that, or should we have not upheld it? Or is it just for information? So yeah, this year it's a little bit different. I've just come into the role in August last year. And so of course I'm finding my feet and getting all this information together for this report. So a lot of them just gave information, and going forward, we should either be providing that information or telling that customer, yeah, we're upholding your complaint. We did that wrong. We didn't follow our process, and this is what we're going to learn from it. Or alternatively, no, we've done it right. This is the outcome, and that's the end of that. So we're a little bit more defined as to what we're trying to achieve from our complaints to our customers.
So information really is a massively two-way street then for you. It could be information coming back in that you can push back out. It could just be information, isn't just about it. It could be information that enables you to look to service improvement.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Macro.
I guess a similar issue, I think, in 6.6, stage 2 complaints in the education team, and it says feedback from customers. What there was that there was little sincerity in the responses, despite not getting things right. We were reluctant to sincerely apologise. So the way I'm reading this is, we had a stage 1 response. The customer doesn't like that response for these reasons, and has then raised the stage 2. So that's correct, thank you. So first of all, I'm wondering what we're doing to try and address that. And secondly, this is a bit of a, not nitty-gritty, but a presentational issue on the same page. The complaints received by team, when this graph has got pasted into the document, a lot of the descriptions have got truncated. So we've got 2 educational teams and 2 school teams, because the rest of the descriptions got truncated. So perhaps next time this report is presented, or the next report, could we make sure that that doesn't happen, please?
Absolutely fine. Our comms team are running through it just to sort of try and tidy some of this up. I save it and close it, and then the next time I open it, it all squishes again. So it's a formatting thing which we will deal with.
Yeah, Microsoft are wonderful for software.
I'll take your word for it. Yes. So around the other element of your question, yes, training. So I've done LGSEO training, and I'm now sharing my training with everyone within the children's. It's important that we acknowledge that we get it wrong. We shouldn't be scared about saying sorry. We should, learn from that. And if it means that we have to change policies, procedures, anything along those lines, then that's what we need to do. We need to be sharing our successes, but we also need to be learning from each other as well. That's really important. So, we do have discussions in team meetings, but training.
Thank you.
Councillor Taylor.
Thank you. Yeah, a couple, really a comment and a question. Great report, and again, it's it's very interesting to read all of this. Found it very informative. Just one comment. I'm looking here at the graph under 5.35, just as an example. I've got some eyesight problems, and I did find it a little bit difficult discerning. Like the 20% portion on that, is that the policy decision or the contact with family? Now, I think I can just about work it out. It would be useful if the percentages were repeated against the individual line items. I don't know if anyone else has got that problem, but I was really struggling with that earlier today, and it was with other graphs as well. And I think it may have even been graphs in some of the other documents that we had. But just moving to another question, there's reference in here, and I'm not going to be able to quickly get back to it.
That's all right.
Sorry, about the creation of a central team in addition to what were the East and West teams. Could you just tell us a little bit more about that? I wondered, did the creation of the central team involve a staff increase, or was it just spreading the existing resource in a different way? And just a bit more information, exactly how has that improved things? I can see it's only been in existence for a small period, but if you could advise on that, that would be helpful.
Probably not the right person to advise on that, but I believe that someone is. But again, your formatting, it's gone to the communication team. So hopefully they'll sort some of this out before it gets published.
Thank you. So with regards to the central team, we used existing staff to make the team smaller, but we did get investment from transformation in additional assistant team managers to enable those teams to be created and slightly smaller. So we had better oversight, line management, supervision and support to staff. So there was a slight increase in assistant team managers, but we utilised social workers and family support that was already in both West and East, just to create that central team.
Okay. You're saying there is evidence it has led to a real improvement.
Yes, it's still early. We're still embedding some of it, but absolutely, I think the training that Sue's delivered, I think we are becoming much more of a learning organisation and building that culture on, learning, high expectations, so we really have a standard that we're setting, and staff are really responding to that. And I think the reduction in some of our complaints, we still get them. We expect to still get them. We just need to be better at learning from them and responding to our customers.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else? To me then, thank you so much for this report. Really interesting, echoing my what's been said before. Could you just tell us, pull out for us, what do you think are the most common themes of complaints that you've been seeing?
Couple of things. Communication. There are certain processes within children's and education where everything goes dark and no one knows what's quite happening. Now that could be because, volumes, the staffing, etc. But again, customers do then call and they don't get responses. They call, they email, they don't get responses. It happens. So it's around communication and letting the customer know what is happening. There's an element of reporting. We do a lot of fact finding when we have new families coming in. And again, it's what we're hearing from our families as to what's happening in our interpretation when it's written down. And just their feeling that, you know, we've got it all wrong and it's not what we said, and that's not how we should be portrayed. So there's an element of, you know, trying to build that trust with his family so that they do share this information, but getting it down accurately, correctly, and making sure that we give them that opportunity to have that oversight of it as well. But still sticking to our professional opinions. You know, we're not there for nothing, but obviously having that good working relationship really early on when there is no working relationship, to try and get that information out of people and to get a good, well balance out of everyone. So it's good communication. I mean, you know, if you're well informed and you know exactly what's happening because you've been able to sort of read and understand it, then you feel much more satisfied with the process because you can see how it's happening. Don't always get the joy of that with children's, because sometimes you're on the doorstep and, you know, you're there in people's faces and you're asking lots of really personal questions. So it's how it's delivered, it's how we do it. It's, you know, it's trying to make that connection really quickly. So.
And have any changes been made in processes? Any systemic changes been made in response to these observations?
There's been lots of training, lots of retraining, and also looking at, you know, what's gone wrong. So we've looked at what's gone wrong and we've looked at how we can make it better. There's definitely new policies being produced. There's definitely a physical element of what we're learning coming out of the complaints. Definitely.
Thank you. How can we reduce the delays in handling complaints, particularly when the Ombudsman is concerned?
I nag constantly. That's my job. Nag. Again, really good training. They all know so part of it's culture. Getting a complaint is not a bad thing. You know, it's not the best thing in the world, but it's an opportunity. So let's look at it like that. So making sure that the customer knows where they can go to get independent advice, making sure that they know our timeframes. I'm telling them straight up front, you know, this is what we're going to do. Making sure that the person who's on the, you know, who's going to do that complaint and do that investigation knows exactly what timeframe I'm looking at, and giving them options. You know, there's some really complex families with really complex complaints out there. You know, be realistic about what we can do. If we can't do it within the timeframe, tell me. I can speak to the customer. You know, we can have that conversation and say, look, it's going to take me longer. You know, if I get an education complaint come in on July the 30th, it's unlikely that I'm going to be able to do much with it for 6 weeks while the schools are off. I need to tell that customer, you're a little bit late. I can't help you for this time. And generally they're fine, but it's about that communication. But yeah, historically we have had some issues, but we've changed the way we've worked. We're empowering people to be able to respond to their own complaints. You know, they're the experts at it, so we're empowering them to respond to the complaints, and obviously, you know, trying to put things right as they go, so it doesn't escalate. So,
thank you. Can you give us some examples of particular complaints that have led to service improvements or improvements of any type?
Service improvements. So more around timeframes, I think, is definitely one of the ways that we are improving. We are getting complaints out on time, which will help customers be able to move forward and obviously carry on with our relationship with them. You know, we're talking about children's relationship has to continue. Trying to think of any other way. Okay. Yeah, come in, Rebecca.
Thank you. One area I can give is working with fathers. So we do see a number of complaints that specifically were coming from dads, from their fathers. So we have developed additional training that was rolled out in May in our practice fortnight, and will be rolled out in our next practice week around working with dads, how we include them, why we include them, more so where dads are probably not living in the same household, but we did see a little bit of a theme that was coming through. So additional training has gone around that. and we will continue to repeat that whilst that has a bit of an impact. But just getting everyone to think about the other parent, might not always be dads, but the other parent that's not living in the household, and making sure that they are fully informed, fully included. The majority will have parental responsibility in the same way. So yeah, that one has definitely been a big learning for us, and thinking about how we put that back into the system.
Excellent, thank you. How do you support children and young people in making complaints? Because it's not easy for them, is it? So well, when it's the child who's or young person who's making a complaint, how do you support them?
So they should have an advocate. So any child that's making a complaint will either, hopefully we'll have an advocate, or we can get an advocate. They can speak to me directly. They can speak to anyone directly that they feel comfortable with. It doesn't necessarily have to be me, because obviously I'm a stranger in their life, and some things happen for them to want to make this complaint. So we will take the complaint any way they want. We will work with that person, those people, and explain the complaints process, make sure that they're comfortable with it and speaking to that child. Again, it can be done in multi ways. You know, there's not one particular pathway that we can follow. It's about making that child comfortable. And then we always do go down the statutory route with children. So again, we would do the statutory route if it goes on to stage 2. So we'll have an independent person, independent investigating officer. So yeah, we do try and make sure that they're comfortable with what they're saying, that there's no judgment on what they're saying, that they feel listened to. And it's about the best way, working with that, you know, with family, to make sure that that child feels heard, and the best way of doing it. So yeah, it's how it works. But generally, it's father advocates. It's through family, and it's just making sure that everyone's comfortable and knows the process.
Thank you. I think that's all from me. Does anybody else have any further questions? Thank you so much, Ms. O'Brien, for this. We need to approve and sign this off, don't we? I have a slight concern that you've been talking about changing improving the report. So, I'm going to ask members if they'll approve this, subject to some cosmetic changes. So, members, may I have a proposer to approve this? Councillor Vickers, seconder. Councillor Sumner. Everybody in favour? Thank you. You too. Very good. Thank you so much. So now we're coming to item 8, the Child Protection Annual Report. So Nikki, we're going to hear from you again.
Thank you. Just to put some context around it, my role within the authority is to manage the child protection chairs who facilitate the child protection conferences. So the purpose of the annual report that we complete every year is to look at the prevalence of child protection within our area and the response to it, how well we manage it, and to understand any themes or patterns that might be arising from that, which would then be used to inform how we practice and how we work with families in the next year. I pulled out some of kind of the main points from my perspective, but I welcome questions on it, anything that I haven't covered. Over the period that we're reporting on, which was the last year, we had 208 children on child protection plans, so that's slightly down on the year before. And our rate by a rate of children per 10,000, which is how we measure against other local authorities and benchmark to explain that rate, was much closer to the England average than it has been in previous years. Just in terms of the key themes that were coming out, what we're seeing is more parental mental health coming in as a factor within conferences. And last year it was identified within 58% of the cases, the children and families that came to conference. Just to kind of, I suppose, put a context around that as well, the Association of Directors of Children's Services, when they brought out their Phase 8 child protection report that they do, it's a big piece of research that they do, they were reporting that that's a national issue, that it has overtaken domestic abuse as a key factor in the families that we're working with across children's services, not just in child protection. So we're also seeing an increase in child mental health. Domestic abuse still remains a really significant factor. It features in a lot of the families that we're working with in some way, shape or form, even if that's historically and we're looking at the impact of it now. One of the things I suppose linking to the domestic abuse is our number of children on what we call repeat child protection plans. So our numbers in respect of children coming onto repeat plans was slightly more increased again. We've done some analysis and some work to understand what's happening, why we're seeing that. And what we're finding is that the predominant factor is the non-abusive parent, where there's a situation of domestic abuse, forming a relationship with a new partner who's also presenting with domestic violence. We do also have, unfortunately, repeat incidents of domestic abuse that will come into play. And there are, again, coming through in their themes of generally maternal poor mental health that then will link to either childhood neglect. They may be drug or alcohol abusing to cope with their feelings. And again, that would then lead to neglect and sometimes physical chastisement, physical harm of children. We've got a very good advocacy service. We buy it in. It's commissioned through the National Youth Advisory Service, who are a national organisation, and they provide an excellent service to our children in child protection plans, and it is well used within this authority for our children to provide them with a strong voice within the conferences. So one of the key things that we always strive to achieve within a conference is to keep children at the heart, children's wishes and feelings and experiences and what they're telling us, to make sure that any plans that we've got coming out of the conferences are hearing what they're saying and taking account of what they're saying. But we also do provide advocacy for parents where there's a need. And so there's a proportion detailed within my report of how many times over that period we've used that. We do on occasion get children attending conferences. The numbers are quite small, and I think it's understandably because the topic of conversation that's happening within those conferences is not always appropriate for them to come. Sometimes they'll come and they'll come and say how they feel and then not stay for the whole conference. So we do our best to facilitate their involvement within conferences where it's appropriate and they want to come and be involved. Timeliness of our child protection conferences is down a bit from last year, and we find that some of that is around parental availability. I think we feel quite strongly that a conference should be held that is purposeful and has impact for a child. So if you haven't got the parents or the right information around you at the point that that conference was scheduled, then it's only right and proper to reschedule it and hold it at a time when you're ready to do a good job and to make sure that we cover everything that we need to cover within those meetings. So that's the basis of the decisions around that. The oversight and decisions around moving conferences and delaying conferences is always made in partnership between myself and the relevant service manager that is managing the work with the child and the family concerned. So that's a joint decision, and you will see within this report that we track the reasons quite robustly as to why those conferences are being rescheduled. Sometimes that we raise challenges, the child protection chairs will raise challenges to ask what the Children's Services social work team will be doing to rectify whatever's caused the delay, if that's appropriate. And we will make sure that is avoided, that repetition is avoided. Emotional harm tends to be the most common child protection category used in West Berkshire, which is interesting because if those that are into their data and have looked, you'll see that nationally, the most common factor is neglect across the country. And when we've looked at that, the reason again is domestic abuse. So it's looking at the impact of domestic abuse upon our children and young people, and by far the most predominant impact on them is emotional harm. We will generally find alongside that a secondary category would be potential risk of physical harm by nature of the fact of what's happening within the home and the risk of being caught up within that. Neglect is coming up as more common for children under the age of 1, which I suppose, you know, if you kind of follow the timeline in terms of if you were thinking about a parent that's perhaps suffering from postnatal depression, somebody who's got poor mental health issues, perhaps some form of substance misuse, then a child under the age of 1, it's far more likely to affect them and be picked up very quickly in that age range because they are just wholly dependent on their parents. There wasn't anything in terms of the demographics of the children that we were working with that's particularly stood out. It's a fairly even mix of boys and girls. Nationally, our rate of children, depending on their age ranges, is very much aligned with the national picture. So nothing was really standing out for us in that respect. I think in terms of our sort of future thoughts and actions, one of the things that within quality assurance and safeguarding, our theme this year is very much around participation across the service of all of the work that we do. And so we're looking quite heavily into how we improve our feedback mechanisms, our complaints responses, and how we improve and heighten the voice of the child and their family. And I think it's worthy of note really to kind of, I suppose, mention the social work reforms and the new recommended role of a lead child protection practitioner. And that will very much link into that because we're certainly looking at the potential of going into families' homes and having a more hands-on approach with families than we currently have as child protection chairs. So quite an exciting time in terms of the development of child protection conferences and that engagement with families that we're really looking forward to commencing. I hope that's helpful. Any questions that anybody's got?
Thank you, Mr. Robinson. Councillor.
Thank you very much for that report and for expanding on it, which is very useful listening to you. Councillor Drummond did refer to earlier, and you mentioned it, that we are a little bit higher than the national average on our children on child protection plan. And you were talking about domestic abuse, and I wondered whether some of that might be, are we quite strong locally, whether it's us or our partnership with Thames Valley Police in identifying and working with families where domestic abuse is prevalent? You know, could that be one of the reasons why we have more on a plan? Are we identifying and we're working more with those families? But having said that, if domestic abuse is such an important element in and the effect it has on children, have we got enough in place to actually work with families, whether it's the abuser or whether it's the victim, on trying to reduce our levels of abuse? I mean, I know we've had programs in the past which have failed maybe through lack of funding, although I know some of them were challenged about their effectiveness, whether it was programs for women. We had something called the Freedom Programme in the past, and that was meant to help women because there was often a thought that, women go from one abusive partner to another because it's all about them, you know. But in fact, it's the opposite. And we're talking. I know we've got abuse from women to men. It's not just one-sided, but quite often the abuser can identify the person, something in the person that is vulnerable, and then takes advantage of that. So it's sort of strengthening. It was women in this place, and it was called a freedom program. I don't know whether anything like that exists now about working with women. And then also, and I myself was involved way back with programs for men who were abusers, and that was about working with men to actually challenge them about their behaviour. I don't know that the program I was on was very.
Do you have a more specific question?
Well, it's asking about prevention, about how we're working with families with domestic abuse, whether if that's such a big element and it's having such a major effect on children, and mental health problems are often linked to that as well. Okay, I'll leave it like that. Okay.
Thank you. I think what I could tell you is that our frontline social work teams, we follow what's called the family safeguarding model, and that is a multi-agency model. So co-located within those teams are domestic abuse workers and adult mental health staff who are all highly skilled and qualified in those roles, and will become involved and work with the families that we're working with as soon as they come into the service. And in addition to that, the social work training, there's a lot of training and emphasis on working with families living in situations where there's domestic abuse, among other sort of obviously key factors that come into play. And so they are in themselves highly skilled with working with families and can do a lot of interventions and direct work with families, again, within that model to try and break the cycle. I think where some of the challenges come, and I've alluded to it in the report to some extent, is that we quite often work with families where domestic abuse is a factor, but it doesn't reach a threshold where we can intervene through, seeking an order through the courts or any way like that. And we can't force parents to engage. And unfortunately, what can sometimes happen is that we find that and I will say it's male perpetrators of domestic abuse, not having that insight into their behaviour and accepting that they are presenting with abusive behaviour and they're not engaging. And so a proportion of some of the repeat plans have been the same parent repeating patterns, unfortunately. We do encourage mums to request what's called a Clare's Law application with the police, which is their right when they're in a relationship with somebody to ask the police whether there's anything in their history of risk or concern that they would need to know about. But again, unfortunately, what we find is some of the mums that we work with, they're not willing to do it, and they can sometimes, for want of a better description, they stand by their partner and they will sometimes prioritise their relationships over their partners. So there's a lot of challenge in working with families. It's incredibly complex, and I think there's a lot of things that underline what happens within domestically abusive relationships. It may be that over time there's emotional damage that's created by ongoing criticism and wearing down of somebody, so that they actually believe that it's them that's causing the situation, and that's quite hard to break them out of that pattern of belief. And it may be that these are children and young people, that they've grown up with it, and they believe that is a normal, healthy relationship. To have a relationship where you're behaving in that way towards each other, and those patterns are very difficult to break. But yes, I think you're referring to the Duluth programme, actually, the Domestic Abuse Perpetrators programme. And I do believe that there are some areas where that still worked, yes. And where necessary, we can link into those things and we will access them.
Thank you. I know there's a lot of good work going on out there. It's sort of about the group work, which you've just mentioned now, which I was interested in. I've got one or two other questions, but
Councillor Sturgis.
Councillor Vickers asked my question about
okay, thank you.
domestic abuse. So thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. I think mine's slightly different. I say I think because I have to be honest, I got lost throughout halfway through what you were saying. No disrespect to you at all. The report is a tough read. I always think this sort of report is a tough read. So I can only commend anybody that that chooses to make themselves part of the solution to this. Mine is very much back to 4.4 in the initial cover report, where we're talking about 21%, over 13% as a national average for returning to CP plans. I suppose reading on from that onto 4.12, we've then got 80%, which I've read as being 80% of that 21% of cases are unavoidable. And it's that element of it, I think, that I homed in on. So this part of the question might be exactly the same as you've just been through, as what can be done to identify this earlier. But can it be, if it is identified, can it be flagged? Can it be reported? And on that basis, is it something which you look at the plan and actually the case doesn't close, so that it doesn't become a repeating plan, that you can find something that means that the work continues, and that you would hope, I was going to say to the point where you know it's not going to be an issue, but I suspect in these cases that really in reality isn't going to be the case at all. But yeah, is there something that within that unavoidable section, that label seems to be quite stark to me. It's a real eye opener as to, you must sit there and think, you know, this is coming back, but you need to follow the process that you need to follow.
Yeah, I think it might be helpful to put some context around it. So in terms of repeat child protection plans, the number of children that come back to repeat child protection plans over the last period, we were talking about 10 families out of quite a large number of families that we're working with. Just to put a context around it, I think, which I hope is a bit reassuring. I think the unavoidableness that I refer to really is generally around non-abusive parents forming a relationship with a man who presents with domestically violent behaviour themselves, because whilst we do a lot of work with our mums, and that work continues after the child protection plans, because procedurally they have to remain open for at least 3 months after a child protection plan has ended, and that's recognising that the child protection process itself and the input that families get is very intensive, and there's a lot of professionals involved, and as you step down from it, those professionals tend to withdraw and leave families to cope in terms of the usual supports and services, what we call universal services that would be in place around them. So we like to phase it down, and we try to phase it down for families so that we know that they're going to cope as we're pulling away. So that is quite a robust system, and it's highly supervised by the social work team managers, and those decisions to close are made based on what they feel at that time is sufficient evidence to support the fact that we've done all that we can with this family to give them the strength and the resources that they need, and to know where to go to for support if they need it, should the need arise. So it's very difficult on that basis then to say how we could avoid it, but we have been thinking long and hard about this, and I've been liaising with the Family Safeguarding Service Manager, Sonia, and we are looking at how we can shore up further that work that we're doing with the non-abusive parents in particular. And also maybe some work we can do with male perpetrators of violence or any perpetrators of violence, because as Martha very rightly said, it's not always the men, that will encourage them to change behaviours. And I think some of that may come through perhaps not linking them necessarily to a domestic abuse worker if they don't want that stigma and they're not willing to accept that that's there, but working with them in a different way and doing that work with them through the social work and the intervention work that we do, perhaps in a more subtle and more palatable way for them. So that's something that Sonia and I have talked about recently and are looking to develop further.
Brilliant. Thank you very much.
Councillor Langford.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I agree with Councillor Sumner. It is a very harrowing subject. And I wonder if I can ask a very off the peg, off the shoulder question, really. It must be a very harrowing profession to be in. And I wonder if the report should have a section in it which talks about the welfare of your staff and how they are counselled or not to deal with this kind of problem. Thank you.
Thank you. It is something that I could certainly consider looking into adding. What I can say is that all of our staff within children's services have monthly supervision with their line managers as a minimum, but they are also in daily contact with them. They are quite often out in the field working with them and supporting them, and we have a very good staff support system that is available to all staff members in fairness across the whole of the council, but obviously available to our staff too, which involves being able to access counselling, confidential support, of a wide variety of it that they can access through the council themselves. It's a very good employee support system. I will say, and as I said, we do also, when we've had, for example, emotions can get quite high in conferences, and that can sometimes be quite confrontational. And we always have a debrief, what we'd call a debrief, with the staff members that were affected by that and involved, make sure that they're okay, and make sure that any support that they need, give them that space to talk really and reflect on what's happened. And we obviously also look at how can we prevent that happening again.
Can I add a supplementary? Yes, I don't want to cause you any extra work to add an extra bit to your report if it's not necessary, as long as you and your colleagues feel that they get the support they need. I don't know that it needs to cause you extra work, but I do think it's an important aspect, because when things go horribly, horribly wrong, it's usually the people involved at the front end that take the rap for it. And in the newspapers and elsewhere, and I often feel that's very unfair. Thank you.
Sorry, I was just going to add, I suppose, one of the areas where certainly additional support would be very welcome would be in terms of the support service that sit around the social workers. I think more specifically the business support staff, we have some incredibly highly skilled business support staff that know the child protection procedures and the timeframes almost as well as the social work staff do. They sit in those meetings, and obviously for them we think about the secondary trauma. By that I mean the trauma of listening to information while they're making notes from it and involved in keeping the records up to date. There are a lot of challenges for them, because a lot of the work, particularly in my service, is very highly administratively laden. Just to put it into context, between April and July this year, we worked out we were roughly running somewhere in the region of about 22 meetings a week, just within my service alone. And that's child protection conferences and child in care reviews. And so that's a huge pressure on a very small number of staff. And so that is certainly an area I think that would benefit from more focus, really, in terms of the number of them that there are and what we have around them.
Thank you. Councillor Vickers, I'm just going to ask Ms Robinson a follow-up question. Could you briefly let us know how recruitment and retention is going, just in context of the difficulties that that people experience in their daily work?
Do you mean in terms of the social work staff? I can talk about the impact of it, and I think then my colleague Rebecca would be better placed to give you more detail on that. The impact for us in terms of the conferences is that it is, as has been rightly pointed out here, it's a very difficult area to work within. It can be very traumatising for some people, and nationally the research will tell us that the average shelf life, if you like, of a child protection social worker could be as little as 3 years. So we do see a lot of churn of social work staff, and it is a challenge because we are a central local authority, so we're fishing in quite a wide pool with a lot of other local authorities that are providing very competitive recruitment and retention packages. And that creates a real challenge for us in attracting in the right staff and the right level of expertise. And that does have a knock-on effect in respect of the fact that the social work can tend to change the actual social worker within the child protection plan, and that can then cause risk of impacting, which again I've kind of alluded to in the report. I'm going to pass over to Rebecca.
Because it's a positive area, if you didn't get it from that little demo. So we've done a lot around recruitment and retention. Nikki's absolutely right in what she said. There is a lot of support, and I welcome the comment and the question around wellbeing, because it is critical to staff in West Berkshire, but as a council there's lots of positives. So we've done really well. We continue to have a focus on recruitment and retention. One of our measures is our agency recruitment, and a year ago we was at around 32% of agency social workers. As of last week we were down to 11%. So just to say that's 10, 11 agency, and some of those are covering maternity leave, some are covering sickness, and some are covering vacancies. So we have done a significant amount of work around recruitment and retention. That don't mean it stops there. We want to focus on retention even more, and well-being of our staff hugely comes into that, but it is a positive picture for us.
Thank you. Councillor Vickers.
Thank you. I think that was very useful, and thank you to Councillor Langford for raising that issue. I mean, I think I don't think any of us would want to do your job. It's such a difficult one. But thank you for the really important work that you do. Nicola, you referred to obviously in the report the problem with parental mental health and how that can be a significant issue in neglect. If the mother, particularly the mother, I suppose we're referring to here, but obviously father's mental health also. If you can't sort of care adequately for the child, and that sort of permeates through the whole of the family. I'm just wondering, because if you're talking about children under 1 or children under 5, obviously we've got health visitors that are supposed to that work with young families, and often who are at your child protection conferences if there's a young child involved. I'm not sure at the moment how much involved they are in monitoring parental, particularly mother's mental health, but that used to be a big factor in what they did. And I hope that is still the case. But I know the health visiting service has changed over time. We used to work really closely, because I was a health visitor, with social workers. They used to have regular meetings on different levels. And I don't know how close that association is now, because quite often the work that a health visitor does in a preventative capacity can impact on what you do and stop, you know, the child having to go to a conference, you know, can actually sort of help much earlier on. So what is the situation about your working with health visitors? You're aware about what's happening in mental health around the work that they do and the preventative work. Can you comment on that?
I think it would be fair to say in general, in terms of all the partners we work with, including the community mental health team where it's necessary, is very good. The attendance within conferences and the willingness to go that extra mile and work with families is very strong in the West Berkshire conferences. I observe them quite regularly as part of my role for quality. In terms of the health visitors, yes, there's real challenges for them, I'm aware, because the number of children that are allocated to them is extremely high. And I know that a lot of their universal services that they provide, whereas traditionally, because I worked with you, Martha, as a social worker, as you probably remember years ago, we traditionally did go out together on joint visits and you're very much more hands-on and able to be in the home a lot more than health visitors now are. And a lot of the supports and services are over the telephone and online or coming into a clinic. So it requires a certain level of proactiveness on the part of the parent. And if they're feeling depressed, they may lack that motivation and ability to get there. So there is a challenge, but I have to say that I think that the colleagues that we work with, the health visitors that we work with, are excellent. Their reports are excellent. They show incredible insight and understanding into the families and the children that they're working with, and they do really work hard to support them to the best of their abilities.
Thank you. I wasn't really questioning the quality of the health visitor or your partner's input. It was more, you know, is the change in their working practice, this lack of sort of one-to-one, whether it's for numbers or for whatever reason, is that impacting? And I think it is impacting on children in many ways, whether it's and this is for health, drop in immunisation rates, whether it's lack of identifying depression and the effect that has in families going forward. I just think that's, you know, that's an issue. That's probably more of a health issue, but it impacts on your work. You know, you don't work independently, do you?
Oh, absolutely. I think that where that impacts the most, in my view, is the preventative side, and that has been touched on earlier in the meeting. You know, the by far the best way to address the child protection numbers and you know, these incidents and these issues that are occurring is early intervention, and we know that, you know, nationally that's known. But unfortunately, the high demand within the high end and the lack of budget around it that comes into it, unfortunately, means that the focus is very heavily and remains very heavily on those families where they are already either the children are in care or they're on child protection plans. The impact, if you had health visitors and you had more pastoral support, youth engagement workers, all of these kind of roles, quite a lot of them that don't really exist in the same way as happened with health visitors, that preventative side is lost. So that early intervention before behaviours get entrenched, before the harm gets entrenched, and it becomes, you know, incredibly damaging for that child. Yeah, the more budget and the more support that we can get through, you know, any means really for that preventative side, that early help. That's, for me, that is the answer. Absolutely.
Thank you very much for reinforcing that. Thank you very much. Thank you for saying that.
Councillor Taylor.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I've got again, I think it's really a comment and a question or two regarding it's section 18 under child advocacy, where it says from 1st of April 2024 to 31st of March 2025, there were a total of 445 occasions where children did not have an advocate for their conference. It gives a figure of 404 in brackets. I'm not quite sure what that means, but my main question was could you tell me how many occasions there were when an advocate was present? Because I'm not sure whether that appears elsewhere in the document, but I don't recall seeing that. And also really more of a comment, that there's a table that follows that, which gives the reasons why the advocate, the advocate wasn't there. But the heading looks a bit misleading. It says no advocate offered to child reason. Yet one of the reasons given is that refused by child. So that suggests to me that an advocate was offered, but the child refused it, if I'm interpreting that correctly. And the same, it said also, there's another one, it says refused by parent carer, but that suggests that an advocate was offered. So I wonder if the heading of that table could be improved. But that's really a question there and a comment on the wording of the table.
Yeah, in terms of numbers of children that access advocacy, as I mentioned before, we have the National Youth Advisory Service who provide formal advocacy, independent advocacy, if you like. So there are certain circumstances where, complaints being one of them, children have a right to have an advocate and must have an advocate. Essentially, those advocates are there for children where they're making a representation or a complaint. But in West Berkshire, what's strong about West Berkshire is that we try and facilitate independent advocacy for any child that we're working with, where we think that they will benefit from having it and need to have that. So the social workers are very proactive in that respect. In terms of the actual number that's accessed them, obviously I don't know across the whole service, but Child Protection Conferences, NYAS are commissioned to provide somewhere in the region of just over 300 advocacy contacts for us. So work with a child over the period of a year, and we have recently increased that in recognition of the increase in numbers of children coming to child protection conferences, increase in demand and need for advocacy. So those numbers will be going up. As of the end of this year, we have a new contract about to start. With the table, yeah, I take on board the point you're making. One of the issues is that that table was taken directly out of our data performance management system, and that was pre-labelled. But you're absolutely right, and I can certainly feed that back and suggest that we reword that in some way. Yes, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's useful to know. I mean, I think going back to the answer, the question just seems to me, for the point of view of this report, it would have been useful to know how many occasions you've given an answer of sort. I think you mentioned a figure of 300, but I think, for that total of 445 to have full meaning, it would be useful to know how many occasions there were when the advocate was actually there. And I'm not sure you've clearly answered that, but you've given me some idea.
I think it's a really, really useful comment, and I think that can be added. I think we're saying how many's not had it, and we're missing how many has had it. So I think it's a really valid comment, and we can make sure that that is included.
Okay, thank you.
Can I just add to that? Every child in the Child Protection Conference has a form of advocacy. So the voice of children is an essential part of every conference that we run, and the Child Protection chairs ensure that that happens. So even where a child hasn't had advocacy, they will have been supported to speak to somebody who they see in a position of trust, in terms of that could be their school teacher, it could be a pastoral support worker. They might choose the social worker, all manner of people. So that child would have had a voice. Every child would have had a voice in every conference. What I'm talking about there is formal advocacy, just to clarify.
Thank you, members. And Mrs. Robertson, I had a number of questions, most of which you'll be pleased to know have been asked and answered. One question remains for me. How do we know that children and families perceive your processes as being fair and supportive? How do we know that, or not?
We do actively seek feedback within conferences, and I've kind of referenced a few in there, and obviously you talked about some of the less than positive responses, which happily we don't get very many, in all honesty. What we've done in response to those. What I would say is that there's child protection chairs, they meet with the families before every single conference that they run. And within that time, they will talk to them about their experiences of the child protection process, whether they understand why we're involved, what we're involved for, and what needs to happen before we're not involved, because obviously they don't particularly necessarily want us involved in their lives any longer than necessary, and we don't want to intervene in their lives any longer than necessary. So there's a lot of points where we will be checking in with families, including the social work teams themselves. They're constantly checking in with them too, to see how things are going. Do you understand what's happening? And so on. And as I mentioned before, part of what we're looking at in terms of the participation, which would include the development of the lead child protection practitioner role, will be how we enhance that even more and give them an even higher voice. And one of the things that is absolutely being expanded upon in the near future is the use of what we call family decision meetings, which are meetings that the family run and they're supported to come up with their own family plans and think about their own support networks and what might work for them to make the changes that are needed. And they will then feed into the conferences. So, you know, it's a lot of change in the future in the next year that we hope will be very impactful in terms of families having a much wider and louder voice.
Thank you so much. I think that's all for on this item. Thank you very much.
Can I just take up on that last point? So if it's a family decision plan, that sounds absolutely excellent to me. But what process is there when there's been a family decision plan made? How does that have to be sort of registered with you so that it can then be not exactly enforced, but so it can be monitored? That's the word I'm looking for, isn't it?
Can I just intercede here, Councillor? Is that a question relating to the report, or is that a question about processes for the future? If it's the latter, I wonder whether perhaps you could have a discussion offline. What do you think?
I can make it really quick. So yes, they're monitored through our system. So certainly we have a what's called a family group conference. We have family plans. We're going to look in the reforms to develop that even further. But yes, they would be families that are open to us. That family plan is then supported, developed, and at a safe time, that is then handed over to the family. But we would have it logged within our system.
So this is reports for information only. We've had a couple of suggestions for improvement, haven't we?
Yep.
What do we need to do with those, Mr. Holloway?
It's just the tables, just some slight formatting changes and changes to the wording, which officers can take back and amend themselves.
There was also the point that Mrs. Robertson spoke about in terms of supporting business support staff. Is that something that we might want to feed back to?
Potentially, that's a matter for the members to decide if they want to make a formal recommendation to the executive or not.
I think we ought to ask perhaps the lead member to have a look and to satisfy herself that there's not a need here that's not being met.
Yep.
Thank you. So then we don't need to vote, do we? Right. Thank you. So we move on to item 9. Send an inclusion strategy delivery plan and summary report.
Thank you. So I'm bringing forward an update on how we are delivering against our Send and Inclusion strategy. If I may, I'll just provide a little summary of the report before I take your questions. So the delivery plan is for this financial year, 2025 to 26. and it is a multi-agency delivery plan. It's not just owned by us and the local authority. We've just updated our governance structure. We have introduced a new priority lead meeting, which will feed into the SEND Strategic Improvement Board. And the priority leads will ensure that the work is connecting across all of the priorities and take any risks or any particular successes up to that board. We've also changed the frequency of all of our priority meetings. It was felt that they were meeting too often at monthly, and that didn't leave us with enough time to actually progress the work in between. So they're now moving to 6 times per year. You'll see that the delivery plan is RAG rated, with over half of the actions on track to be delivered by the date provided. Where it is showing as overdue or that there's an issue or not started, that is likely due to the action being held by a partner or that there is a lack of resource or capacity across the whole system. Just to give you a couple of really positive headlines from the delivery plan. So we have created some additional childcare places across the district. We've got 9 parent champions that parent champion volunteers that have been trained and are actively supporting our families in the community. Phase 1 of our school mental health project is already showing some positives with increased attendance and reduced suspensions within the schools that are taking part. And we are currently co-producing and testing new banding with our schools and against our EHCPs with the SEND team. Thank you.
Any questions, members? Councillor Drummond.
Thank you, Chairman. On page 209, 5.6.3 priorities inclusion, it's got dyslexia friendly award. Could you tell us something about that?
So I'm not the subject matter expert on this, but our learning support team, the cognition and learning team, are leading on this. And I understand that they are undertaking some work with schools at the moment where they are going to be assessing themselves against some criteria, and that will lead forward to the Dyslexia Friendly Award.
Okay, and the next one, 5.6.4, priorities, development local specialist provision. It's got the Castle School, it's got 4 additional classrooms to accommodate 32 additional pupils. I mean, that's really good news. Thank you very much. That's it.
Thank you.
Councillor Macro.
Thank you. Thank you. Got a couple of unrelated questions, actually. First one is in 5.7.1 capacity constraints, basically saying that we don't have the capacity to do the annual reviews and meet statutory requirements. So I'm wondering what we can do about that, really. And oh, sorry, I've gone too far. The other thing is in 5.7.3, data and systems. It says a strategic review of the Capital One system has been undertaken. Now, basically, I think this is saying it won't do the job. So I'm wondering what we're going to do about that, please.
I may bring my colleague Kirsty in to help answer this. Do you want to take the annual reviews? No. So we do have, is it 2 interim? 2 interims. 2 interims that have been appointed to support with the annual review, specifically around Year 6 and Year 11 phase transition. And they have had their funding agreed until March 2026. So they will see through all of the phase transition deadlines. In terms of the review of the Capital One system, there are still some concerns around how the Capital One system will allow us to put the data that we need into the system to get out what we need. Kirsty and I have been working very closely looking at what other digital systems are out there, and we're currently working on a business case to perhaps adopt something, an EHCP hub, which will reduce a lot of the administration time for the SEND team, but will also provide us with that data that we need around all of our processes.
Okay, going back to 5.7.1, it mentions there 1 agency worker, so that's now been increased to 2, has it?
Yes, I think that was a
Thank you.
recent.
And it does sound it would be a very good idea if we can move on with that computer system. If it's going to save administrative work, if I can get the word out, as well as provide the data we need, it sounds a double win. Thank you.
Councillor Taylor.
Yeah, thanks very much for the report. Again, very useful. I've got a question on the Send Youth Forum in the report, and I can see from reading that. I mean, there was a forum in place. It seems that it was being run by an organisation called Send IASS. And we're now involved in a retendering process with them. I mean, could you just give us a bit more information on that, and what is the likelihood that that retendering will lead to the re-establishment of the Youth Forum, which I feel is quite an important. You recognise it clearly as a key challenge. It could be good to see that coming back into play.
Yeah, so the Youth Forum previously was run by Sendias, and then it was brought in-house and an apprenticeship, but the apprenticeship came to an end, and there was not the capacity for someone else with the apprenticeship coming to an end to pick up the Youth Forum. We have looked at other ideas, so you'll see in the delivery plan and the report that there is additional participation capacity within social care, but there's not the capacity for that role to pick up SEND specific work. However, if there is a child in care who has SEND needs, then their voice will be heard through that participation network. The retendering of the Sendias colleagues who are involved in that work have been made aware that Sendias did used to host the Youth Forum, and they're currently in the market engagement element of that work.
Councillor Vickers.
Actually, I was going to ask the same question as Clive about the Youth Forum. So thank you for answering that. I'm just looking, I mean, is there any update on local special provision? Because obviously previously we've had to send a lot of children out of area. I see that is expanding. Are we quite happy with, or is there much more to be done? I'm just looking at what's written here. I know Castle School has expanded, and so is there much more to be done there to provide local provision?
Yes, so we have had an interim education development officer in post, and we have a new one starting next week, and they have done a lot of data analysis around what specialist provision we feel we need in the district. The Castle School has obviously already had that expansion, and we're still looking and working with schools around who may be able to host provisions specifically around autism and SEMH needs, looking at introducing resource spaces or units to meet those needs.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Garat. Some points from me. First of all, just an observation. The paper has a different name from the agenda item. So I just think that's a bit of housekeeping.
Sorry, Chair, that may be my fault. We did receive the report quite late, and I didn't have time to go back through and amend the title, so that's my fault.
Thank you for putting your hand up. How were the priorities chosen? The priorities in your strategy, how were they chosen?
So the original strategy was for 23 to 28, and that was written prior to my time working at the council. However, there was a lot of co-production work that took place, a lot of feedback surveys, coffee mornings, listening forums to find out what was important to our local community. When we came to write the strategy, again for 24 to 29, because we needed to do it in a different way. Again, we used all of that feedback. The priorities changed slightly. So in the 23-28 version, we had specific priorities for emotional-based school avoidance and short breaks. But we didn't lose that when we created the strategy for 24 to 29. Those specific things, so emotional-based school avoidance and short breaks, are specific task groups that have always been in place and feed into specific priorities that are there.
Thank you. It's good to see the specialist provision being increased. Of course, that comes at a cost and an ongoing cost. How will you evidence to show that the provision of the increase in provision actually leads to better outcomes for our SEND children?
I think we all know that it's best to keep our children and young people as close to home as possible if we can. And I think that can be reviewed through sort of the annual review process and that stream.
Thank you. Can you tell us a bit about how we support young people into employment and independent living post 16?
So we have had access to the internships work grant for the last 3 years, and we've recently received the 4th year of grant funding. So that has enabled us to work really closely with our supported employment provider, Ways Into Work, and we have been able to have a SEND employment forum. We're currently working with other Berkshire local authorities to develop a joint SEND employment forum across Berkshire, because we're all working across borders with the same colleges and the same employers. It makes sense for us all to work together and not have separate meetings. We are also looking at increasing supported internships within the district. Ways Into Work have worked very closely with Newbury College specifically to increase Ways Into Work, our supported employment forum. They have worked very closely with Newbury College to increase the number of supported internships offered there. And we are looking to lead by example and become an employer offering supported internship placements too. Last year, I think it was November time, we hosted an event jointly with Ways Into Work, which was an information event about supported internships. We had over 80 people attend. It was a really popular event. And we had one young person come and talk to everyone there about their experience on their supported internship, which has led them into securing permanent employment at the Royal Berkshire Hospital.
Excellent, that's really good, thank you. Last question that I have relates to the Ofsted SEND review that we had. What learnings have come from that you put into that you kind of responded to in the development of the strategy?
After we had the feedback from the thematic review, we did review all of the actions within the delivery plan. Specifically off the top of my head, I believe there's an action in there around making sure that we're sharing information timely, and also some of the things that we learnt from the thematic review were already in the strategy already around alternative provision.
Thank you, Ms. Gaddett. Oh. Thank you for coming. Thank you. Thanks for a great report. Now we're on item. What do we need to do? This is just for to note. Yes. And do we have any suggestions or? Okay, thank you. So item 10 then, young person co-opted members. Mr. Oliver.
Thank you, Chair. So as part of the changes to local scrutiny arrangements that were agreed at the annual meeting of council in May, it was decided that we would actually go above and beyond what is required under the statutory requirements in terms of appointing co-optees and appoint 2 young people as co-opted members of the Children and Young People Scrutiny Committee. So this will allow the voice of young people to be represented in scrutiny meetings and for them to actually have a say in the services that affect them. As non-statutory appointments, they would not have voting rights, but they would be able to speak to any Part 1 item considered by the committee. In developing our proposal, we have reached out to other local authorities that have already sort of co-opted young people onto their scrutiny committees, and I'd particularly like to thank colleagues at Milton Keynes and Oxfordshire for very generously sharing their experiences. Subject to the committee's approval, we are looking to start the recruitment process within the next few weeks, reaching out to schools, colleges, children in care, etc. And a proposed advert is included in Appendix A of the report. So candidates will be interviewed to confirm their suitability for the roles, and all going well, we would look to have them appointed by the end of the year. In addition, we are proposing to commission an external organisation to provide support for the young people to help them understand the reports, because it is quite a complex sort of area, and help them to develop suitable lines of questioning for the meetings. So we're hoping to go out to that tender process within the next few weeks just to seek expressions of interest, and a suggested scope is provided in Appendix B of the report. Co-opting young people onto the committee would require additional protocols to be put in place just to ensure, address safeguarding concerns. Also, it's proposed that training be provided by this external organisation to ensure that members and young people can work together as effectively as they can. Proposed arrangements are set out in paragraph 5.11 of this report. So the report's basically seeking the committee's endorsement for these proposed arrangements. So happy to take any questions.
Councillor Drummond.
I think it's a great idea. We should have done it a long time ago. Thank you.
In fairness, Councillor, this is only the second meeting we've had.
Even so.
Councillor Vickers.
Yeah, I mean, excellent. But I'm just wondering how and I see, because I was going to ask about Berkshire Youth, but I actually had another look, and you've mentioned Berkshire Youth in the report. And will we also be approaching the I colleges as well? Because these are often the children in the I colleges, they're excluded, but, that doesn't mean they're not able to sort of, be part of this process. And how do we actually choose to? I don't, how's that? They're not going to sit there and be interviewed, or what we look at these forms and we think, well, this one expresses themselves better than others, but we're actually looking at a variety of children here, and some of them might not be very, I don't know, able to express themselves as well as others, but might still have, just as we have advocates for children in other circumstances, we might need a child who needs an advocate to express what are very real sort of opinions that need to be heard by the council. And so I'm just wondering about, it's quite complicated to actually choose these two, and obviously the safeguarding issues seem to be quite large as well, and whether they're on video or not on video, and so it's a great idea, but it's complicated, isn't it?
Yes, thank you. Those are very good points, and it's things that we have thought about. iCollege, absolutely. We're happy to engage with all the groups that are working with young people at the moment in West Berkshire. In terms of advocates, I think that is part of the role of this organisation that we would look to support. If I look to what's happening in Oxfordshire, they've got a very similar system. They've commissioned Oxfordshire Youth, which is the equivalent of Berkshire Youth, to do this work. Obviously, we can't preempt who would be coming forward as part of the procurement process, but that's the sort of body that we would envisage working with the young people. In terms of safeguarding, we have thought about whether it would be better for them to be joining the meeting remotely, from home. We need to consider the unique circumstances of each child, because the child may not have a suitable space at home that is suitably private, or a quiet space where they can join uninterrupted. So it'd be a case of just discussing that with the child and working out what the best way forward is.
On the comment about the suitable space, if we are working with Berkshire Youth, we might be able to sort of, they might be able to use the waterside or a similar centre to have a little bit of privacy, maybe with a worker in the background to actually support them or something.
If they come from Newbury.
I said a similar place. So we've got other centres across West Berkshire. Sorry, I'm very Newbury focused.
Councillor Macro, did you have your hand up?
No, thank you. Yes, it's an excellent idea. I'm just worried about a bit in section 5.6, where it says it will be necessary for co-opted members to be bound by the members' code of conduct and to sign a declaration of interest form. It seems a bit onerous for some youngsters that probably don't even know what an interest is.
Yeah, this is something that's been through our monitoring officer. So she's basically said that anybody who is co-opted onto committee has to go through the process. So we would need to sit down and explain everything. I don't imagine that they will have much in the way of interest to declare, but yeah, it's just going through that process and just making it very clear to them that there are certain standards of behaviour that they will need to adhere to when they are joining in with the meeting.
Councillor Taylor.
Yeah, just really a couple. I think it's an excellent idea. I don't have any problems with the proposal to do this at all. I'd be interested. I was sort of thinking back. We're looking for people who are non-political and independent. I'm sort of thinking back to when I was sort of 18 or 17, 18, 19. I'm not sure I was non-political even then. We're all political. You know, we perhaps like to think we're independent. Why is there a specific requirement for this, for these young people to be non-political? Because I can think of some people that might be interested in this. I think they are interested in politics, and they're immediately going to count themselves out when they read that spec. The other thing was that it seems that this. I mean, I agree. You know, it's got to go through. You know, the protection of these young people is important. All the rules and regulations need to be followed. But however, it seems to be discouraging them from actually attending the meetings in person. Now, which I think is a bad idea. I think it would be useful if they were here in person. Now, I've recently joined the corporate parenting panel, and I've only been to one meeting. I've never been briefed on that group, incidentally, but I noticed there were some quite young people there at that meeting, and the fact they were there and they made major contributions, and it was much more effective if they were there rather than on a Zoom screen. So could there be some explanation as to why, one, the political bit, perhaps there's a very good reason for that I've not, that I will accept. And secondly, the attendance at meetings.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Taylor. Very good questions. The non-political, if they are overtly saying that they're a member of a political party, we need to take that account in terms of representation at the meeting. The other thing is, even if people are politically affiliated to a particular party, when you come to scrutiny, it's almost a case of leaving your political affiliations at the door, because we are trying to look at things in an objective manner. In terms of safeguarding, we have thought of all sorts of different things. One of the things that occurs is what happens at the end of a meeting. Our meeting can go on from anything from 8:30 to 10:30 potentially, and just getting that child home safely. It's how they actually get that lift home at the end of the night and communicate to you. And if the meeting ends and their lift hasn't turned up, what do we do then? There's all sorts of little funny annoyances around it. So, but very happy to look at how we actually encourage them to come in and work around that if we can.
Okay.
I think you make a good point, Councillor Taylor, but about corporate parenting panel, but that tells us we know how to do this, doesn't it? So I think we have experience from of working with young people in corporate bodies. So, but a point well made.
Will parents need to consent to their young person joining the meetings and the safeguarding aspects that may unfold during the meeting that the parent may or may not know about?
If they are under 16, definitely. I think I've got something in the report about what happens at 16 and 18. Certainly parents would be informed. If they're below 18, I think we would need to copy them in on all correspondence relating to the committee as well. We'll need to make sure that correspondence goes through goes through myself rather than through individual members with them. So there are all sorts of protocols that we have put in place and thought about. So yeah, but parental consent will be certainly appropriate depending on the age of the child.
Does that satisfy you?
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Jeffrey.
I must admit, bearing in mind that everybody that's on this council at the moment is in some way or other political, with the exception of just one member who is independent, but was actually elected on a political ticket. I feel very, very concerned that we should say that somebody who's under 18 mustn't have or declare any politics. I was a Conservative until I was 14. I then became a Liberal. I've never stopped being a Liberal since. And I had strong political views before I became a Liberal and since I became a Liberal. And I don't think that being frightened of a youngster having political views is really helping the council in any way. I think they should come along and be able to make their useful contribution or not make their useful contribution.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. I will take that one back and check. I suspect that they may well be entitled to political views. I think it's just the affiliation with a party because it affects the political balance of the committee. So I would just need to take that back and talk to the monitoring officer about it.
Councillor Sumner.
Thank you, Chairman. I think it's an excellent idea. I think the issue around whether they are politically biased or based, whichever word you would like to insert, should just come through the terminology of the advert that goes out there, which is that this is not a political role. I think that clarifies it. What thoughts they have, what they think at that time their political affiliation might be, as you've just said, is entirely likely to change. I look at conversations I've had with several people around the chamber when more people were in than there currently are. It's not uncommon that people change their affiliation from one party to another as they change their views as they grow up, as their education permits them to understand different things. I think I heard Councillor Macro just say, if they're not voting, then actually, does it really matter? It's the comments. But the issue for me is, why do we want the young people to be involved? And if that's to contribute to the conversation and to deliver structure, then we need to make sure that we find a way to make it work and work successfully. I think Councillor Vickers, you said about us interviewing, well, 5.4 says that they will be interviewed, and I think they should be interviewed. And actually, it depends on the age of the candidate. If that candidate is 16 plus, then actually sitting an interview is good basis for what they're about to come to in the next few years anyway. So, let's help them with that to a degree. The only other point, which is a very minor thing because we're not talking about a massive amount of money, is that value that's stated in the paper pro rata, or is that a 25, 26 and it will be an annual value regardless of where we are in the year?
It will be paid pro rata as we go through the year. I believe it's paid in 11 instalments and depending on when they start in the year.
Okay, so it may go up slightly from the figure that we have in the paperwork, but again, it's not exactly a lot of money, and I think the existing budget that's stated that it would come from should be able to absorb it, and I would like to think the administration will be able to find a few grand to make it happen. Well, the leader's name is on the paper, so I'm assuming he's already looked at that. Sorry, there was one other thing, Chairman, if I may, before I close down, which is that I think, Mr. Oliver, it would probably be good practice for anybody that thinks they are interested in this, and including their parents, to watch some of the recordings back of scrutiny meetings, certainly tonight and the last one that's taken place, depending on the timeline.
Thank you. Yeah, so I think the process is going to be will inform the decisions that the young people make, and I don't think the whole debate around political or not non-political, I don't think it's really going to feature. But I think it's a good idea just to make it clear to them that this is an apolitical body. Okay, we are politically represented, but we all want this to be free of politics, don't we? And I have a question relating to how effective the young co-optees will be, not in terms of what their capacity is, but how can we be sure that they will have real influence rather than just, you know, we let them turn up and let them speak? You know, how do we deal with that?
Yeah,
That's a question to the paper presenter.
Yeah, that's a very good point. So I think it is a case of there's an element of training to ensure that we can actually relate to them in a way that works. I think we will also have to check in with them after each meeting just to make sure did they understand the papers. Did they feel that they had ample opportunity to speak to an item? Did they make the points they wished to make? And yes, I think it is about choosing the topics that they will be able to engage in. And one of the things that I've been asked to try and progress next is a youth forum, so that would provide another potential avenue for youth engagement as well.
Thank you. Any other questions then? Right. So we have a recommendation then that we, the committee, endorse the proposed approach, including the process and timescales for the recruitment of 2 young people as cooperative members of the Scrutiny Committee. The proposed support arrangements that we heard about from Mr. Oliver to be put in place for the 2 young people. The proposed training to be provided to the young people, members, that's us, and other co-opted members of the committee, and the proposed safeguarding protocols to be put in place. And all that's set out in the paper, isn't it? So do I have a proposer then? Councillor Somner and Councillor Vickers, seconder. Are we all in favour? Yep, thank you.
Chairman, can we just be clear that all the other notes that Mr. Oliver has just taken need to be taken into account with that as well? You probably need to speak to the leader about that. His name's on the paper. Is that what you were saying?
I'll certainly take back the comments about the non-political bits and clarify with the monitoring officer. I think budgets are all fine. That's not a problem.
I don't think there's anything that's been said that you've noted that changes our mind from supporting the paper and the motion to do it.
Item 11, the forward plan. So members, are there any items on the forward plan that you wish to review ahead of the relevant meeting or decision? So, any comments at all? Don't have to be. No. Okay. No comments then. Thank you. And then item 12 is the work programme. Are there any items on here that members wish to review? Is there anything you want to add or change?
Number of items to be programmed.
Yeah. We have youth services, wraparound care and attendance strategy. Also the youth council. Items that are going to be programmed in, and you'll do that offline, will you?
You can either agree this evening which meetings you would like them to come to, or we could have an offline conversation. I suggest the Youth Council item comes to the December meeting. We are in the process of drafting the reports at the moment, and I believe there's a youth takeover day in December, and you potentially could go to council after that if that would be agreeable to members.
Councillor Vickers.
Thank you. Yes, as regards things to possibly discuss in the future, I think I mentioned at the last meeting, and I don't know whether you think this was a useful topic, but the use of phones in schools was highlighted at a working group we did on health scrutiny about the negative effects of phones in schools. And that might be something that when we've got our co-opted young people, it might be something that they would want to contribute to, because there's a lot of talk about the use of phones in schools, but they have to have them because the schools work with phones. But I don't know. I mean, I don't know enough about the subject, but I thought maybe a general topic about the use of phones in schools. And I don't know where it could slot in, but the use of our schools in school holidays, it was another issue that I thought might be dealt with somewhere, about whether our school buildings could be used to help with activities during school holidays, because that's a big issue often, is that families with little money can't pay for expensive holiday activities. So those are probably not well presented, but they're issues that I thought might be worth at some future date, including in some scrutiny exercise. Does that make sense?
It does. I'm just, so there are 2 points there. There's the use of phones in schools, which kind of, to me, it feels as though that's a matter for schools.
What extent the well-being of our children?
Okay, so what problem are we trying to fix here? Children having phones in schools?
Yes. Yes, I mean, sometimes, I mean, and all right, I suppose what you're saying is individual schools have the power to have, they have their own policies. Whether or not it's just looking at the evidence out there, or, I mean, other people know more about this than I do. I'm just picking up anxieties that I hear around me and reports I hear on radio programs, various things. Other people will know more about this.
Where did you I get the impression that this came from a discussion in another body.
No, just sort of out there in the ether, you know, sort of. Oh, well, I mentioned first of all that I think when we had our children and young people's task group, I think it was not an issue dealt with in detail, but it was something that was referred to in that report. So I might go back and look at the report and see whether there's anything in there that might be relevant. I think possibly our Berkshire youth reps or reps from the schools highlighted it, I think.
Councillor Macro.
A couple of things, but just to support Martha on that one. I've read quite a lot suggesting that children's mental health is being affected by social media on phones. And we've seen already today that children's mental health has been progressively getting worse over the last few years. And also yesterday I saw a report saying that an objective study has found that schools where phones are forbidden, the children there are doing much better than schools which don't impose that. So I think this is well worth looking at. But the other point I was going to make is I don't think this list includes the things we suggested were added to the list last time round. Certainly one that I suggested is missing, which was the impact of the declining birth rate on our schools. And I think there might be one or two others as well, but 300 and odd pages is a bit difficult to double check.
I can't recall the comment. I think we did have some discussion around it. I didn't know if we actually reached a decision as to whether it would be taken up as an item or not, but happy to add it to the list if, yeah. Oh, did we? Okay, right, sorry, that's my fault then for not adding it to the programme. I do apologise.
I think what was the other point you raised, Councillor Vickers? Oh, the use of school estate, yeah. Yeah, of course we used to have the summer activity programme, didn't we? Yeah, that was largely a political initiative. So I'm wondering whether it might be something that we could think about council addressing. Councillor Sumner?
Thanks, Chairman. I think on that one, I mean, yes, I don't have an issue with it coming forward for conversation. I think there will be a cost, and I think that needs to be heavily reflected in the and you rightly made the point that those that you would expect to be interested in it might be those that can't afford the more expensive activities. I think the tendency from schools was to get companies in to put things on, so you end up in the same position. But we're in danger of trying to resolve the problem before we've actually discussed it. I think it coming forward is not a bad thing. I think every school is probably going to approach it from a different angle. I think just to go back to the previous item though, I think actually Councillor Macro's probably closer to the target for the paper, in that if you start with mobile phones, you're going to try and isolate something which is probably part of something that's much bigger. It probably should be something more about children's mental health and whether phones and social media is impacting. Papers and publications are now out there, but I think it very much depends on what the title of that requirement is, and actually probably conversation with our officers will determine what the best matter is to bring it forward with.
I think that's very, very wise. I think we'll take this offline and I'll have a discussion with Mr. Oliver and come back to you. I have my eldest grandson started at secondary school last week, and he's got his mobile phone for the first time, and he's not allowed to use it in school, but it gives his mum some reassurance that, you know, if he to and from school, he's able to stay in contact. You know, it kind of feels to me as though this is the modern child and their needs. But we'll have a discussion and come back to you.
Yeah.
Councillor Taylor.
Yeah, I was just going to add, I was just going to pick up on the fact you mentioned it briefly, Martha, that there was the working group that I was on looking at mental health issues. And I know we produced a report. I mean, maybe does that report need to come to this committee to sort of review the actions that I had an idea that was going to happen, but it hasn't happened as yet, has it? Perhaps that's not something that needs to be on
I
the forward
don't actually
agenda.
know what body of report you're talking about.
Martha, I'll let you. Can you answer that, because you were running that group?
Yes, I thought it was probably, I mean, I could go back and look at it, but we did a task group, 3 or 4 sessions looking at adolescent mental health. And then that task group. No, this is at Health Scrutiny. Okay, so this has been prior to the formation of this committee. And it was a very, lots of representation. So a lot of information in there, which should probably be very useful for this committee. It went to Health Scrutiny, and then I think we did recommend.
Drop second.
Sorry, is it down there?
November.
Oh,
It's on the executive plan, 6th of November.
it's actually there. Okay.
Okay, my apologies.
I hadn't seen it. Right. Yeah, but we had decided it would come here, so it's good to have it. It is coming in November.
Looks as
But it won't come here, will it?
Hmm?
It won't come to us before November, will it?
Come back to us.
Yes, this is the date it's going to the executive.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh, so it's going to the executive, but it's not coming here.
I think the plan was to bring the report on mental health in general from the task group to the executive to make the recommendations up. I think there was one recommendation for further work could be done by this committee or a task group thereof. So it's really a case of, do we want to set up a task group to look at mobile phone use in general? Does that ring a bell? Yeah, but another task group, because it only touched on it, I think, well, that's what Vicky Phoenix mentioned to me as being the recommendation, but I haven't seen it myself.
It might come here. Okay. Well, at least you're aware of it out there. So maybe Dominic can have a look at it and
Thank
think,
you.
would
We'll
it be
dis-
useful?
We'll discuss this and get back to you.
Yeah, okay, right.
Social care inspection could come to happening there, and whether that would be ready in time, or does it need to slip till March? That one, whether it needs to slip till March because it's only happening now, I don't know. Whether Rebecca knows.
No, yeah, absolutely. No. Yeah, no, I think that's a good idea. You're just talking about you've seen the item on the plan, move it, put it back to December.
Yeah, that's absolutely fine.
That being that, we have concluded this evening's business. Thank you, everybody, for attending the meeting. And will you please remain seating until the Zoom host has told us that the meeting is no longer being streamed.
Thank you, Chairman.
We are no longer live.
Thank you.